Okay, I think I'll begin and then we'll let people in as they come. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation on flood mapping and wildfire resilience. This presentation is part of a series brought forward to the Coastal Climate Resilience Collaborative to support knowledge sharing and ideation for regional climate resilience. The project is funded by Natural Resources Canada's Climate Resilient Coastal Communities program, and we're glad you could all join us. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm joining today from Toronto, the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mended. It is covered by treaties such as Treaty 13 and Williams Treaties, and is historically known as Toronto, the place in water where trees are standing. I would also like to acknowledge that ICLI Canada's work takes place across Turtle Island, the traditional territories of diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're committed to continuous learning and meaningful action in the spirit of reconciliation and to working in partnership with Indigenous communities wherever we operate. Thank you. Next slide, please. Welcome to our knowledge share. It is a space for everybody to learn and share their knowledge about topics we've had interest in the past. Today's presentation will give you a quick overview of two key topics: flood mapping and wildfire resilience in BC. We have three presentations today, and we'll also have a Q&A following each presentations. You can put your questions in the chat or raise your hands and we'll take them up. Thank you. So our first presentation is from Fraser Basin Council. We have Jenny Koss and Daniela Rivera-Dobels presenting on Fraser Basin Council BC flood mapping program. We asked them to join us to talk about the BC flood mapping because during one of our coastal adaptation exchange, many of you said that you wanted to learn about the flood hazard identification and mapping program, also FHIMP that FBC is leading. And we're looking forward to Daniela and Jenny sharing their insights on BC flood mapping. The floor is yours, Jenny and Daniela. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Nikita. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Yeah. So as Nikita mentioned, my name is Jenny Koss, and I'm with the Fraser Basin Council on our water team. And I'm presenting to you today from where I work and live on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm also joined today with my colleague Daniela, who is also on the water/flood team with me. Thank you. So a bit about the presentation agenda. I did want to just do a couple slides on who is FBC. Then, of course, the overview of the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program, which we call FHIMP in BC. A really quick part on the BC flood strategy relation, as I'm sure many of you are curious about that. The FHIMP technical approaches that the consultants take, and then a wrap-up, couple of slides, followed by some audience discussion questions, just if we have time. So that would be after the Q&A. So let's get started. Who is Fraser Basin Council, or FBC? We are a charitable not-for-profit organization that was founded in 1997, and we have three key strategic priority areas. That is to build sustainable and resilient communities, support healthy watersheds and water resources, and take action on climate change. So my team is working in the support healthy watersheds and water resources area. And we do have a number of roles that we play in these three areas, including facilitator and a strategic convener, an educator on sustainability, and program manager. Now, our name is the Fraser Basin Council. However, we do actually have a province-wide mandate, so that's why we sometimes pop up outside of the Fraser Basin. So the Fraser River Basin was part of our original mandate when we were founded in 1997, and then early on in the 2010s, our mandate expanded to be BC-wide. And we do have several offices in the province. So as I mentioned earlier, myself and Daniela work out of the Vancouver office. Later on today, I believe Alex, our regional manager, from the Thompson Okanagan Regional Office in Kamloops will be presenting on wildfire. We also have a Northern Interior Regional Office that's located in Prince George, and then the Caribou-Chilcotin Regional Office over in Williams Lake. Further, though, we do have employees who, live and work outside of these offices. We have some folks on Vancouver Island too, for example. So what is our flood management role? We do a lot of development of flood hazard and risk information. We do education and help with informed decision-making. We also help professionals, practitioners, and policymakers connect by providing spaces for them to come together. And then finally, what most of my team is working on these days is project management services for the flood hazard identification and mapping program. That is to say, we are not flood engineers. The flood engineers are the folks who we contract out. We're much more focused on information sharing. So without further ado, FHIMP in BC. It's a program that's running from 2022 to 2027, and it's a federal program that has a 50-50% cost share with the province. So the FHIMP1 floodplain mapping projects were launched in 2022, and these 7 projects some have already completed or just about to be complete, and they're all, though, finishing up this year in 2025. And you'll see that they're spread a bit throughout the province, and over 37 First Nations and 32 local governments have been a part of FHIMP. It's something that's really great to see, to have this high level of community engagement and involvement. And then all of the FHIMP and BC projects do have the same set of criteria, and they have the same deliverables that they come out with at the end of the day. So different consultant teams may have different methodologies based on a unique region that they're working in, but all of the projects are held to the same standards and have overarching consistency in that area. Now, this slide does say FHIMP1, so that means there must be a FHIMP2. The FHIMP2 projects we are launching in 2025, and they're going to be wrapping up in either late 2026 or 2027. And so the Chilliwack River project and then the Similkameen and Tulameen Rivers project, we actually have recently hired consultants for, so they've just begun their work. The Okanagan Basin Creeks project has just launched their RFP, so not quite hired consultants for yet. And then finally, the Lower Fraser River project from Mission to the Salish Sea, we're still doing pre-engagement scoping on that. So figuring out what the scope is on that project, who we should be contacting and talking to, and what communities would like to see as part of that project. So the goals and objectives of FHIMP are to develop high quality, standardized, consistent floodplain mapping for higher risk communities in BC. And the mapping is useful for a wide range of purposes, which include informing your land use planning policies and development decisions, assessing potential impacts to people and other community values and assets, preparing or updating your emergency response plans, informing other flood mitigation and climate adaptation measures. And then, of course, if your government and community wish for a different usage, you can do that too. Communities that are participating in FHIMP are under no obligation to use the maps for a specific purpose. So how are some ways that FHIMP is promoting consistency? A lot of it is in the data collection methods. So, for example, we have the federal floodplain mapping guidelines. The EGBC, so Engineers and Geoscientists BC, also have a flood mapping guideline series. There's also some additional technical mapping requirements for FHIMP projects specifically in BC. And then for data collection, there's also BC LiDAR specifications. And I forgot to put this on here, but there's also federal LiDAR specifications. And it's important to note that they're a bit different. So the BC LiDAR specifications are important because then LiDAR that's collected for these projects can be imported into the BC LiDAR portal. And so then other communities can use that LiDAR for different projects. And finally, the province is working on an online portal to host these floodplain mapping projects. So with FHIMP, we're really looking for open access, modernized methods, in addition to that focus on high-risk areas. And as part of the federal funding, all of the maps need to be available to all Canadians. So they need to be publicly accessible maps at the end of the day. We do have a number of digital deliverables that the consultants submit as part of the projects. And they have these standardized naming conventions so they can easily be imported into that online provincial portal to display the projects. And then the province is also looking at getting other floodplain mapping projects that aren't FHIMP projects up and operating into that portal too. But it does take a lot of additional resources and agreements because they don't have that consistent naming convention and consistent deliverables like the FHIMP projects have. So what are the deliverables for FHIMP? The main ones are flood extent map PDFs. So this includes the 20-year, 200-year, and 500-year flood events. And these are especially helpful for emergency planning and response. It also includes your flood construction level and setback maps. So those are PDFs, which include the estimated 200-year flood or the flood of written record, whichever is greater, plus climate change, plus freeboard, which is your factor of safety. And this map is especially helpful for land use planning and setting your minimum building elevation. And then finally, I did mention that there are digital deliverables associated with FHIMP. So this includes GIS layers. So that's flood depth, extent, and velocity for 5 different flood mapping scenarios. And the reason why we have additional scenarios that aren't on the maps is just the maps would be very crowded if we put 5 different scenarios on them. So that's it's nice that the GIS layers have some additional information, and then communities can mix and match this information together and also use them with their own internal data sets. And finally, yes, the FCL and setback ISO lines are included. So this is just an example of a flood extent map PDF on the lakeshore. So all of the maps have a consistent cartography. That is to say, for the 20-year flood event, they all have that same dark blue. For the 200-year event, they all have the same green. And then for the 500-year event, they all have that same light orangey yellow. So this is a lakeshore because you guys are a bit more coastal focused. This is the Shuswap Lakes Region project. And then this is what a flood construction level map for FHIMP looks like. So this one is a bit special because it does have vertical wave run up. Most of our maps do not have this. It's just for the shoreline here. Most of the maps have the flood extent over here, and it shows how much it goes in. So this area is with your wave run up and your wave action, and then this is where you could expect the water to go into. And for this map, you do have your FCL lines here, so like the 351.6 and 351.3. And if you are property between these two areas, it's suggested either to go with the higher of the two numbers, or you could hire someone for a site-specific analysis to interpolate between the two and come up with a very specific FCL for your area. I did also just want to show what a riverine one would look like. This is more similar to most of our maps because most of our projects to this point have been riverine projects. So you have your flood construction level or your FCL ISO line here. And then you also still have the FCL numbers for the height that you would want to build to. And we also do have a 20-year septic down here. So that's really useful for communities that are on septic and areas that have property that are on septic. I do want to really briefly go into how does this relate to the BC flood strategy. So BCFS and FHIMP were developed differently, although FHIMP does support a couple of the BCFS goals. So the BC flood strategy key pathways include understanding flood risk, strengthening flood risk governance, enhancing flood preparedness, response and recovery, and investing for flood resilience. And in the understanding flood risk, that first key pathway, there is an action to develop a provincially coordinated floodplain mapping program. And the thing is that FHIMP is not a provincially coordinated floodplain mapping program. It's a federal program, and it does have an end date of 2028. And it was developed outside of the BCFS, even though it does help with some of the BCFS goals. So when the federal program was established, BC believed that it would be a good program to benefit from, especially because it's a 50-50 cost share with the federal government. There used to be a provincially coordinated floodplain mapping program, and the last one that existed ended in 2003. So we do not yet have a provincially coordinated floodplain mapping program. On to some of the technical approaches. So now that you've seen the map, there's actually a lot that goes into the creation of the map. It includes engagement with communities, data collection, a hydrologic assessment, a special flood hazard assessment. So this can mean an ice assessment, for example, or an alluvial fan. So your steep creeks, your debris flow assessment, a geomorphic assessment, which is more about erosion. So if you have a setback line on a map, it shows where the river could go if there's a big flood and it comes outside of the river corridor, so where that erosion is happening. And then hydraulic model creation. And all of these play together to create your floodplain maps. Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the hydrologic assessment and the map creation, because the hydrologic assessment is where the climate change comes in, and then the map creation is standardized across FHIMP. So for consultants accounting for climate change, it is a professional standard to account for climate change in all floodplain mapping projects. That is the typical professional standard. And there are a few different methods to go about this depending on the data available for the region. So in general, the methodology that consultants use includes a review of data and reports by agencies like the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, so PCIC, and also ECCC, so Environmental Climate Change Canada. They would also do statistical tests on historic flow data within the project study area. So looking at where are the past high water level marks, what data do we have for this river or this shoreline? And then they would also do a review of the magnitude of climate change with the global climate models. And finally, though, the consultants do assess the limitations and the uncertainties that are associated with their analysis, because there will always be some limitations and uncertainties. So part of it is it's almost like a show your work kind of thing. So making people aware of what are the limits of this analysis. And then based on these factors, the consultants will select the design flood or the flood that the flood construction level maps are based off of with a climate change percentage factor. If there's not enough data on certain water courses, the consultants do rely on the minimum 10% increase from the EGBC professional practice guidelines. And in BC, we do rely on the professional reliance model. So it's not that we have a standard number across all projects. It's that as part of the projects, the consultants need to do their homework. They need to check in like what data is available, what is a realistic scenario, and then also pair that with their years of experience working with climate change and flood mapping. And I wanted to just go briefly a bit also into making a flood construction level, because that's part of the big deliverables of this project. When you're making a floodplain map, you want that flood construction level. So you start with your mean water level. So where's the river typically at? And then you have a 20-year flood. This would be a floodway. So if you are to construct something inside of a floodway, that's a very bad idea. And then we have this design flood level that I've been talking about. So this is the 200-year event or the flood of written record, whichever is greater. As an example, on the Lower Fraser River, we use the 1894 flood event. That is much greater than a 200-year flood, but that's the flood of written records. So the Fraser River event is closer to a 500-year flood event. It's actually a little bit larger than a 500-year flood event. And the consultants also factor in their climate change that they've done through the hydrologic assessment. And then finally, they're going to add the freeboard, so that factor of safety. In most cases, it's about 0.6 meters. However, there are times when the data is very limited. We had a project that we had a lot of trouble with the data collection. The conditions were not good, and they were actually a bit dangerous for folks to be out collecting data on the river. And so in that case, we knew that the data wasn't as good as many other areas of the data. And so the consultants recommended a greater freeboard for that area to reflect the uncertainty of the data collection. And then that's how you get your flood construction level. So there's a lot of different components that go into it. And as part of the analysis, the consultants do need to determine what the dominant flooding mechanism is. So it depends where you are. In some areas of the province, that could be an ice jam is going to create those big floods on the river. Other rivers are spring freshet or even rainfall driven. And so that is part of their analysis, is determining the dominant flooding mechanism. So just again, you saw this a little bit earlier, but now you're armed with a bit of additional information of what goes into this FCL. So this is the flood fringe. This is the extent of the FCL, and it is quite large, but that is due to a number of factors being put into it. And then also, I think something that would be of relevance to the group. So this is just a quick schematic of a shoreline FCL. So like the design flood FCL we talked about earlier, that includes climate change and either the 200-year or flood of written record. Shoreline FCL would also include wave heights from a wave analysis, and also run-up from an analysis of what the slope is like coming into the water. And that will give the consultants the wave effect zone. And then that, in addition to freeboard, will give you the flood construction level. We only have had a lake project up until this point, so we did not account for sea level rise in the lake project. But of a coastal project, the consultants would also account for sea level rise. And in BC, the guidance recommends that for 2100, it should be 1 meter accounted for in sea level rise. And then again, this is the lakeshore map that you saw earlier, but now you have the additional knowledge of what goes into this wave run-up. So you can see that that's where the waves are anticipated to go into. And then as a wrap up, so some key takeaways that we've learned working on the FHIMP project, that we've learned working on the FHIMP projects from the last few years, is that we have a technical committee, and that's actually a really useful tool in our toolbox because they give consultants probing questions. And we do regional projects where some communities don't have that technical expertise in-house. So these projects do undergo rigorous technical review. The regional projects are also like very helpful because there's this economy of scale, but there's also more opportunities for engagement if some communities are more involved than others. And then the communities can learn from their neighbors too, because they will all have the same standardized, consistent flood maps. Some additional key takeaways is finding the right people to connect with on staff during engagement. So through FHIMP, we have learned the importance of community engagement early on in project scoping. And then also that technical information is one piece, but integrating it into local regulations is the other. So FHIMP is quite a limited program. It is very focused on creating the technical floodplain maps. Integrating it into local regulations, though, is something that the communities must take forward themselves. The FHIMP program, unfortunately, is not that encompassing. And then we also have found that many of the hydrometric stations have spotty data. So this is a recommendation we received from multiple consultant teams, just flagging us to this issue. There are these stations set up by the Water Survey of Canada across the different riverine systems. And also some local communities have gauges called staff gauges. But the data there can be very, not unreliable, but there's less data there than one might think. So the stations can wash away easily, especially during a big flood, or if it's too dry and the river dries up, the station can stop working. And then a station might never have been replaced. So it is important that if you have an event, like a flood event, have someone go out and try to get the mean high water mark, see how high the river or the shoreline gets, because all that information is incredibly useful for people who will be making a floodplain map. And the more data that they have, the more accurate they can be. And I would just like to leave you with a resource slide. So I believe the slides will be shared out, and you folks can explore the resources on your own. And yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I will also share the resources in the chat from the presentation. Um, we want to open up the floor for questions. If folks have any questions, you can raise your hand or type your question in the chat. Rebecca, go ahead.
The chat, Nikita, by Lisa, if you want to read that out.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead with Lisa's first?
Yeah, maybe we'll take it in order if that's okay, Rebecca. Sorry.
Yeah. So Lisa has a question. Do FCL numbers include regionally appropriate subsidence or rebound?
Not that I don't believe they do, but if you could maybe clarify your question, is this in relation to seismic?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the number includes land motion, basically, which in some cases might be subsidence or might be rebounding, given the location and context. Or is that something that the municipality or has to add themselves?
Yeah, we haven't gotten this question before, so I can check in internally also about it, but I don't believe we do. We do look at erosion, and so kind of erosion pathways. So there is that setback for, if the land's getting cut into through erosion. But I don't believe necessarily subsidence and rebound.
Okay.
Hey, I have a question for my own organization. Are you able to share what types of organizations or roles are represented on the technical advisory committee? I'm really curious about that because it sounds like a really great feature. And like you said, it was a key takeaway.
Yeah, so the FHIMP program is a federal program, and so it's made up of a couple engineers from the feds and then also some provincial engineers. And then one person from FBC is also on the technical committee. So they, ask those like the more technical engineer questions that, for example, I wouldn't ask. And then also we have a steering committee that does different funding approvals for it, but they're a little bit more removed. We see the technical committee more often. And so it's just, I think, really helpful for especially some of the rural communities that are involved in the projects, because it's bringing in that extra technical expertise and having some additional eyes on things.
Thanks, Jenny. Dave, you can put your question forward.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for the presentation. Lots of good info. I'm curious, from the provincial side, are you folks working with EMCR on this as well in terms of disseminating the information when this is complete? What I'm thinking about is, I mean, this should hopefully be on the Climate Ready BC site when all is said and done.
Yes, that's actually the portal that they're working to put it on, is the Climate Ready BC portal.
Great.
And yeah, we do work with the flood safety section on these maps. So that's more in Walrus, but yeah, we would like to be able to distribute it more. So if you have any names for people who would benefit from it, that would also be helpful for us, just so that we make sure that they get a copy when they're ready.
Okay, yeah, I know for the folks that I'm dealing with, yeah, having it on Climate Ready is sort of the key place. I can think of others. I definitely will pass it on.
Yeah, and they're not on the portals yet, or the portal yet. So the projects, we haven't quite completed the first one.
Yeah.
And then they do have a period of up to 1 year to get it all sorted out on the portal. So it's been a really interesting process. I'm not with GOBC, but from what I understand is because it's new and they're uploading things, it does take a bit of time. So it's not yet ready on the portal, but it should be within the next year.
Great, thank you.
Ines, you
So
can go next.
much. Thanks, Nikita. Yeah, great presentation, and thanks for giving us this. It feels like a preview, right? Like a sneak peek. There's a lot more coming, so it's great to have a sense of what is coming up in the province and be able to fit it into the greater picture of all of the work that the communities are doing. I have been getting a couple of messages of regrets, so others are looking forward to also reviewing your recording. So thank you for the recording possibility as well. I had one question as I was listening to your presentation that I don't think I've covered, so I'll pose it and maybe you can speak to it. You mentioned the flood mapping guidelines that are at the federal level, EGBC, and there's a specific BC technical requirements one. I was wondering if you have knowledge of how they compare with each other. Like, is flood mapping conversation and these guidelines kind of getting to some consensus of standardization, or is it still, really location dependent and like that discretion? The piece that you mentioned about EGBC being professional reliance being really the core of it.
Yeah, it is professional reliance. So I myself have not read through all of the guidelines. Some of the information which I think I wouldn't quite understand some of it since I am not an engineer at the end of the day. But the folks on the technical committee all know and are all familiar with the guidance because they are engineers. So that is really nice. And yeah, I think that they're probably working to see where things can nest in. But I will give an example. So the federal LiDAR specifications are actually a little bit different from the BC LiDAR specifications. And we did have one project that did the federal LiDAR, but it actually wasn't to the BC LiDAR specifications. And so I think there was just a lot of back-end processing work that was involved in getting that information ready for the BC portal. So it is important that the consultants will read each individual one. I don't believe there's any information that contradicts each other, though. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. If we have any more questions from the group or in the chat, we'll keep an eye. All right, so our next presentation is also from FBC. We have Alex de Chantel from FBC presenting on Community Wildfire Roundtables. Alex is the regional manager for the Thompson-Okanagan region with Fraser Basin Council, where he leads initiatives that support climate adaptation, watershed, health, and collaborative governance. He works closely with First Nations, local governments, and community partners to advance practical solutions to complex sustainability challenges. Alex also oversees programs such as the Shuswap Watershed Council, Kamloops Air Quality Roundtable, Thompson Shuswap Salmon Collaborative, and Community Wildfire Roundtables. With a strong background in facilitation, community engagement, and fund development, he's committed to fostering partnerships that enhance wildfire preparedness, reduce risk, and build safer, more resilient communities across British Columbia. It's our pleasure to have you with us, Alex, and we're excited to learn about the Community Wildfire Roundtables. Over to you.
Thanks, Nikita. I appreciate that intro. It's always makes you blush when someone reads out your bio, so I appreciate that introduction. Thanks very much for having me here, folks. It sounds like you got a little introduction to some of my colleagues, which was great. I saw Jenny just at the end of her session there. So I'm really pleased to be here to talk about the Community Wildfire Roundtables, which is a long-standing program that we have here at FBC, and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about it. So I think we'll just jump right into it if we can. So I know you got a little bit about who Fraser Basin Council is, formed in '97. It's a charitable nonprofit. We have over 50 staff now. We also have regional offices in Prince George, Williams Lake, Kamloops, the Fraser Valley, and then the head office is in Vancouver. So our vision statement is there. As you guys probably know, we like to advance sustainability in BC. So social well-being supported by a vibrant economy and sustained by a healthy environment. Still haven't managed to memorize that vision, but I do think it does capture what we do quite accurately. So we're going to talk about our CWRs. You'll see that acronym in there. Often when I'm facilitating, I'm also the acronym police. So if you do see any acronyms in the presentation, please just raise your hand and I'll make sure to give you the full definition. This is a photo from our inaugural Shuswap area roundtable. So we had just started in the spring and we just had a little bit of snow left on the ground there, and it was an excellent meeting in Salmon Arm. So the Community Wildfire Roundtables began in 2019, but they came as a result of some key recommendations from the Abbott-Chapman report. And for those who were in BC in 2017, it was quite a devastating wildfire season. And the Abbott-Chapman report came out a few years later. And one of the recommendations was better coordination and better communication. So FBC's approach here was to take what was recommended and then go and pitch it to the provincial government. And as a result, the Community Wildfire Roundtables were born. So I always like to give folks an understanding of who's who in the zoo, I like to say, and who attends these wildfire roundtables. So I've got a long list of members here. And I really like to make sure that folks understand why we do this. And this is a classic Fraser Basin Council approach. We always try and cast a wide net. And I always like to say that we invite anyone and everyone that has a lever to pull in terms of wildfire preparedness. And so we've got First Nations governments, local governments, and volunteer fire departments. And this is so important and a really critical part of including everyone around the table, because we are in very rural areas and smaller communities. And so they are really critical to the response when it comes to wildfires in those areas. So we always like to ensure that all the volunteer fire departments are invited. It's really important too to create those relationships between the volunteer fire departments and the other levels of government that they may be working with in the event of a wildfire. So we also have different ministries from the province. So obviously BC Wildfire is there, Ministry of Forests, and Emergency Management and Climate Readiness as well. So list continues. We have Forest Enhancement Society. I want to talk a little bit about the Fire Smart program, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but we make a concerted effort to work through the local Fire Smart coordinators to include the neighborhood champions as well. So I always say never underestimate the power of a grassroots movement. And these are folks who are on the ground, gathering up the neighbors, having community events, hiring out a trailer or getting a sea can to dump branches in where they collect things off the ground. But these Fire Smart champions are really, really important. And so I always make sure that we include these whenever we start up a new roundtable in a new community. So we've got response groups as well, forest industry and licensees, woodlot licensees, community forests, agriculture and ranching sector. Again, they're often disproportionately affected by wildfires, especially if they're out in rural areas. They're the knowledge on the ground, right? They know the landscape, they know the back roads. Really key again to introduce these folks at these meetings. And as I like to say, it's really important to make these introductions and shake some hands while you have a calm and very, it's just the opposite of an emergency situation. So if you're able to make those introductions face to face, I think those go a long way once you do have an emergency and things are a little bit more stressful and tense. Railways have just started to become a lot more engaged, which is great to see. They often also have some transportation corridors. They do have some grant funding on occasion, so it's important to have them at the table as well. The local outdoor recreation groups, so I just spoke about the Shuswap area. These are like the Larch Hills Nordic Societies, the Shuswap Outdoor Club. Again, these folks are really knowledgeable around the different trails and maybe Forest Service roads in the area. BC Hydro, again, a really important partner. Forestry consultants can be helpful, and any kind of community groups that might be interested in the topic of wildfire preparedness. So overall, the purpose of the wildfire roundtables is to ensure good coordination and communication. And again, who's doing what around wildfire preparedness in your area. I always like to say we build readiness in the locations that we attend and where we've built these wildfire roundtables. I always like to clarify as well, the focus is on those first two core pillars of BC Wildfire Service, which is wildfire mitigation and wildfire preparedness. And we do not wade into the third and fourth categories, I like to call them, which is around response and recovery. So the efforts include conversations around risk reduction, collaboration, training, community capacity building as well. So ultimately, we are here to try and create that readiness and make sure communities aren't caught off guard and that they are able to transition rapidly and effectively into response when needed. You can see a photo here, and I talk a little bit about this and some of the speakers that we like to bring in. This is Alan Westhaver, kind of known as the forefather or the godfather of the Fire Smart program. I think he's got over 25 years in this area. I like to call a subject matter expert for sure. He was asked to go into Fort McMurray after the fires they experienced there. And so he brought in a great presentation with some of the video that he was seeing as a part of his investigation. And that's what you see there in one of the photos. So as I said, the goal is to bring together all levels of government, organizations, anyone working towards wildfire preparedness. We always like to support the implementation of local governments in terms of their community wildfire resiliency plans. So we always like to ensure that their key personnel or key staff from local governments are there. We always like to try and support them in terms of any community engagement or any community events that they might having come up. They also provide us with maybe early drafts of those CWRPs, and we always link those in the meeting summaries so everyone has access to those. We always like to give some time on the mic to our FireSmart partners in the area so that they can talk about some of their initiatives as well. We talk about fuel management treatments in the area, primary fuel banks, and often trying to coordinate interface treatments. So anything that wildland kind of urban interface. So as I said, we started in 2019, however, in 2023, just due to popularity of the roundtables and just interest and demand, we were able to expand from 4 to 8, so doubling the roundtables that we have in the interior. The staff up in our Northern Interior office facilitate the 3 meetings in the north, and then myself in the south, out of the Thompson Okanagan office, I facilitate the 5 meetings in the south. So just that top row there, those are the original 4 that we started with. And the bottom row are the addition, the expansion that we had in 2023. So I handle the Clearwater, Clinton, and Lillooet, and then Similkameen and Salmon Arm as well. So topics in scope, cultural and prescribed burning. I think anyone who had the privilege of attending the wildfire conference that was put on by FireSmart BC in Penticton this year, you would have seen a recurring theme, and that was around cultural prescribed burning. This is a really big focus area for a lot of folks in this working in this area. I think the theme I've seen is, partnering with First Nations is really important. It's really vital. And then fire on the landscape is really, it's a positive thing when done in a controlled manner. I think what I've heard is, years and years of fire suppression has just created a buildup of fuels on the forest floor. And that's why the cultural and prescribed burning is really gaining in popularity now. So along that similar vein, the fuel management on the ground, fire smart education, wildfire risk reduction, training and capacity development. So trying to connect folks in those kind of community response groups with funding, training, and even equipment if possible. And then emergency planning for wildfires and any interagency cooperation that we can facilitate at our meetings. So what does FBC do? Well, we convene the meetings, we facilitate the discussion, and we produce the meeting summaries after. So we include any links that we can from partners or from speakers, and we send those out to everyone on our contact list. not just those who were able to attend. We maintain a website, so wildfireroundtables.ca. You'll find all of our meeting summaries there, and any kind of supporting information or supporting documents for each of the roundtables in the communities that we support. We always share funding opportunities, which is really important as well. A lot of them through UBCM and that type of funder. We maintain local contact lists. So this is a really simple piece of what we do, but a really vital component to the process, I find. Contact lists are always outdated, I find, and an important piece of what we do is we continually ensure that these are up to date. There's changes in staff, whatever it might be. So we're always making sure we have the most recent contact info, both email and phone. We also find that we are always being asked if we can add other members to the group, which we do. Some of these, even the smaller communities, are well over 100 folks on our contact list now. Not everyone attends, but everyone gets the meeting summaries. So that's the coordination piece that I find really important. What else? We do post those meeting summaries online, but we don't post the contact information. For those who we do have on our contact list, we share out the meeting summaries following the roundtable, and we also share the contact information. And we do seek approval and permission to do that before we add the contact information in. And then again, really, it's that to connect people and develop those relationships and improve communication. Wildfires, it's a large beast, it's a large animal. There are a lot of different partners working together for wildfire preparedness, and I just find that these meetings really provide that networking piece. So what does it look like? So we meet in person with 2 to 3 times per year is our goal. We do take a break over summer for obvious reasons. A lot of the folks around the table are quite busy. We really work with the local community as to what is needed here. I'd say a majority have gone to 2, but we do have a few that still meet 3 times per year. And that can be around if they are looking at updating those community wildfire protection plans to resilience plans. If they've got a lot of engagement going, then we sometimes add that 3rd meeting. Meetings are typically around that 10 to 3 p.m. And we do provide lunch as well. And again, never underestimate the power of good food. I mean, for those who work in the space of meeting facilitation, good food is really important. Good food, good conversation, I find. We take full 1-hour lunches, and that's by design. And I always encourage folks to try and sit next to someone you don't know. And then I also challenge folks to see how many handshakes they can get in an hour. And then I also follow up in the afternoon when we kind of reconvene around 1 p.m. And I ask a few folks, how many handshakes, how many new faces, how many new introductions did you make? Because really that's what this is all about. So we do coordinate field trips as well in the spring. So we'll meet in the morning and then we'll add a field trip in the afternoon. This can be really valuable. It's great to get out in the field. A lot of the folks there kind of work in the field anyway. And so it's important, I think, to balance that inside boardroom type of meeting with getting out on the land. I did mention Alan Westhaver. This is something we try to do. We did a bit of a tour with Alan Westhaver where he did some presentations in the community. So outside of the wildfire roundtables that we host, he did an excellent job. We had some great attendance, especially in the smaller areas, talking about Fire Smart and the benefits of preparing your home and talking about that ignition zone around the residence and that kind of 3 meter up to 10 meters around your home. In Prince George, we did hold a mock wildfire scenario with a full EOC activation, Emergency Operations Center. And my colleague up in the north was the one who led that. And it's actually led to a second scenario kind of exercise like this in another community. So these are just an example of the type of things that we try to add to our meetings and bring value to the folks that are there and attending. So I always like to wrap up with this cartoon because I think it really plainly illustrate some of the challenges in working in this environment, right? So a large wildfire, and this could be for any type of natural disaster, but there's typically a flurry of funding and activity that follows something like this. It at times cannot be coordinated, multiple levels of government. Sometimes the treatments or solutions are done in illogical or ineffective places. Duplication can exist, gaps can exist, and it can be really challenging to know who's doing what. And at times, resources aren't maximized or not leveraged. And so this is where we find those community wildfire roundtables really create value for those in the communities that we visit. And I think this cartoon does a good job of showing an example of what that can look like. So I always like to end with a little bit of a smile. Yeah, I guess just before I sign off, this really isn't complicated. The model is not all that complex, but what I do find is that it does need a dedicated staff person to oversee these. You need that long-term view, and that's what Fraser Basin Council can provide. If this falls, let's say, on the local government, in the community, we can have staff changeover. I think we all see that quite often, but let's say there's a priority project that lands on their desk and all of a sudden something like a roundtable gets pushed to the side of their desk. It can often fizzle out and maybe not have that long kind of sustaining run that we really like to see in these types of roundtables. So yeah, it's just important to have that consistent staff person, I think, that drives the bus, creates the calendar invite, sends out the meeting summaries, chases folks down for presentations or links after. And I think that's what FBC can do and provide value to those who are attending. So that concludes my presentation. I've got my email address there if anyone has any questions or follow-up. And of course, we've got the Wildfire Roundtables website there if you're interested in learning more and maybe jumping into a bit more of the nitty-gritty. And that's the presentation. So I'll leave it there and just if there's any questions.
Thanks, Alex. I think it was a great presentation and very useful. Many of the folks on the collaborative had shared their interest to learn about these community wildfire roundtables beginning of the year. So thank you for joining us today. We will take up questions from the participants, or if anybody has questions, you can put it in the chat or raise your hands.
Oh, some familiar faces. Dave, nice to see you again. I think we worked in Kelowna briefly there.
Yeah, it was a few years ago now. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation and the info. My question maybe is kind of obvious, but you listed the 8 communities where you are holding the roundtables. I believe it was 8. And my question is, how do you develop new communities to do this in? And obviously, since we're all here from the coast and there's none of those are on the coast, and I'm thinking, I mean, I'm in the island, and given, the fires we've had this year, it's like, it's probably not a bad idea. A place like Port Alberni, for example, could use this. And so how does that work in terms of getting new additional communities involved?
Yeah, great question, Dave. So around expansion, so BC Wildfire Service is our funder, and they gave us the direction around staying in the interior of BC. That was a few years ago, and we have seen more fires on the island. I think we saw this summer. So there probably is an argument to be made there to get down to the island or even Sunshine Coast, that type of thing. So we were asked to stay in rural communities, maybe less capacity in some of those smaller towns. So we did do a bit of kind of a canvas of our contacts in the different areas. Having a Fire Smart program was important. Capacity from local government and First Nations to engage and attend. Interest as well. We did find not everyone was interested. Maybe they hadn't experienced a wildfire, but that was another key critical component as well. And then almost just a local champion. If someone's willing to help develop the contact list to get it up off the ground, maybe provide some meeting space as well. That was another critical one. And then having BC Wildfire support. So we essentially created a bit of a short list, shared it with BC Wildfire, and then they helped us select the final 4, I'll call it, when we went up to 8 locations. Yeah, we also went to UBCM. We had a presentation there as well, just kind of talking about the expansion and that if anybody had any interest. We did go a lot through regional district, kind of electoral area directors, quite often because they oversee and are well connected to some of these smaller communities, right, outside of the busier centers. So actually, I found that to be really helpful because they were quick to say, hey, we've got, a volunteer fire department that's really interested in this and would like to be involved. And that, of course, makes our decision a lot easier. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for that. That's good to know. And obviously, it sounds like, yeah, if the community champions the cause and kind of advocates for this, they can probably, sounds like it's, good chance of that. So, yeah,
That's it.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Dave. Good to see you. Hi, Naz.
Thanks, Alex. It's a follow-up to Dave's question. So those champions are staff members with the community, with the local government or regional district, or can they be champions from within the community that is not associated with the local authority?
Yeah, I would say it's First Nations local government first. If they have a CWRP, the Community Wildfire Resilience Plan, or let's say they are embarking on updating it from the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. That was a key component too from BC Wildfire Service. So we kind of looked there first. Yeah, I would say local government, First Nations, whether they're working on a plan was kind of the key driver, I would say.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this question of like reactive versus proactive. Like you mentioned, communities that haven't had experience might not be thinking about this, but we live on the wild urban interface, and better to avoid having that experience is on my mind. I was also wondering, just a quick other question, if it's possible to know what is the BC wildfire support in terms of funding? Like how much does it cost to maintain, and is it like what number of years do you get a runway with for the wildfire roundtables?
Yeah, so I am grateful to BC Wildfire Service. I think they see the value in the multi-year funding model. So I believe it was 3 years to begin with, and then we had a 2-year extension. And so now we're into negotiating for the next few years. Cost, it's usually myself and one other colleague. There's travel, hotel. We do try and lump those communities together if it's a further away from my office, and kind of create some efficiencies there in terms of just doing it a 1 or 2 day trip, saves on some travel. We book the facilities, so if there is a rental fee, the catering, that type of thing. So I would say it does vary. I'm not sure I can reveal the total funding cost, but it is kind of location dependent, I would say.
Yeah.
How much kind of in-kind support we can get from local government.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's useful.
Rebecca.
Hey, Alex. Good to see you. I'm kind of curious. I used to work for Alberta Wildfire just over 10 years ago now, and recall it being a very male-dominated industry. So that was over 10 years ago in Alberta. I'm kind of curious what you've noticed in terms of diversity among some of these roundtables, and if anything has come up in looking to diversify more, or that's even an issue at the moment.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. So diversity in the participants, kind of those in attendance. I would say at the local government level, I would say there's definitely more diversity in terms of the gender of who's attending. When we get into the volunteer fire departments, it is pretty male centric. Yeah, I would like to see more females, and I think we do see in BC Wildfire Service in terms of those folks on the ground. There's definitely more and more females. I know I've got a couple friends who have jumped into careers with BC Wildfire and really enjoy it. So they're definitely capable, and there's interest out there. If I was to guess, I would say 3/4 male attendance at our wildfire roundtables, maybe 1/4 female. But I think what's really important and what I really enjoy is that there is great First Nations attendance at these. These are non-consultative. There's no kind of legislative requirement here on these. These are kind of information sharing, relationship building. But I think just as important is that trust building. And so having First Nations around the table, having BC Wildfire Service staff there, accessible, and I see those conversations happening at lunch, and it is quite often between First Nations and BC Wildfire Service, and I think that's really important and really critical moving forward, because I would say First Nations are also disproportionately affected by wildfire as they're in the remote rural areas. So anytime that we can create those relationships and build the trust, I think it's a win for everybody.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, I can tell from some of the slides there and the examples, the importance of food. Like, you clearly put a lot of work into setting up a good foundation for that trust to develop. So that's really cool to learn more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, and just from my previous event manager roles that I've had, spending money in local communities is a really powerful choice, and I always look for First Nation caterers when I'm there. And if we can meet in First Nations community halls or community centers and push that money into First Nation communities, that's something I take really seriously, and I always attempt to do that. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. I think these are great insights, great conversation. Yeah, and on the say a similar theme, we have another presentation on wildfire resilience in BC, rural and remote communities, project initiatives from Simon Fraser University. We have two speakers, Jana and Sharon. Jana is a recent SFU graduate with a joint major in sustainable business, business administration and environmental sciences. As a research assistant on the Building Climate Resilience in Rural Remote Communities in BC, she focuses on climate resilient building materials costing and funding program assessment, aiming to empower and learn from communities on climate change mitigation and adaptation. Um, Sharon is a researcher on the PICS Building Climate Resilience in Rural and Remote Communities in BC project, focusing on wildfire smoke adaptation and climate resilient housing. She holds a master's from public policy from SFU with award-winning research on income-based disparities in adaptive capacity, and has collaborated with Morris J. Wosk Center for Dialogue, BC Wildfire Service, and served as a policy analyst with BC Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. We're excited to hear from both Jenna and Sharon today and learn more about wildfire resilience in BC. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to start off with a really quick introduction. So my name is Kathryn Wells. I usually go by Kat. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of introduce the project itself, because yeah, it's on building climate resilience in rural and remote communities. We are BC-centric project, and so we wanted to kind of put this presentation together to showcase some of the project initiatives that are around wildfire resilience in rural and remote communities in BC. So yeah, with that said, I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge that climate impacts disproportionately affect rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. Our well-being and survival really depends on increasing climate resilience that comes from the connection, wisdom, and values that Indigenous peoples have to the land, water, and ecosystems. So our commitment is really to work with communities to help address the imbalances our colonial practices have produced. So who we are as a project is a collection of researchers and professionals from places like SFU, UVic, First Nations Housing and Infrastructure Council, BC Housing and Technical Safety BC, among others. And we're in partnership with PICS, which is the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. Our project goal is to work together to enable and empower rural, remote, and Indigenous communities through co-developing innovative solutions that leads to better housing, technical systems, and things like energy security across the province. And first, one of the first initiatives, I should say, that we kind of brought forward with this project that has to do with wildfires is the Community Fire Resilience Handbook that we're creating. So this is to build community-led handbook for fire resilience planning in these rural and remote areas. And the vision for this project is to build something that is for future generations that uses a strength-based and values-based approach, as well as addressing capacity building. And so rural and remote areas, as we know, often face the brunt of forest and urban interface fires in BC. So this handbook is really to serve and support the climate resiliency piece in an effort to get everybody in the community really involved in fire resilience. So it aims to be sort of a reflection of the wants and needs and strengths of First Nations in BC with community-based action that creates the fire resilience. And so applying our approach really means looking for affordable and attainable ways of building capacity in these rural and remote areas. So it looks like things like low barrier and low cost activities that really complement resources like fire safe without replacing them, because those are really important, as we just heard as well. So before I pass it over to my colleagues to talk a little bit more about some other initiatives on wildfire smoke, and as well as wildfire resilient housing and building materials, just wanted to highlight one thing from the handbook itself. So our colleague Valentine came up with this wheel as a tool that was really to envision the intersecting aspects that makes community fire resilient, and utilizing a holistic approach that looks at things such as housing conditions, the impact of smoke on air quality and well-being, as well as things like policy and planning and governance, and all the other things that are listed here. So I just wanted to make a quick note that we're building a website where everybody will be able to download this handbook. It's going to be available, this wheel is going to be available in the handbook, as well as a blank one, so people can actually just build their own version of what's important to them with this one as sort of an example. So that'll be available sometime this fall, like mid-fall. We're releasing our website, so something to look forward to. And I will pass it over to Sharon.
Great. Thank you, Kat. And thank you all for having me today, and it's lovely to virtually connect with you. I think the introduction was quite strong, so reintroduce myself quick. My name is Sharon Sa. I am pleased to do this work with Kat and Jana and some other researchers that's funded by PICS. We just go to the next slide, please. I wanted to maybe begin by sharing a bit about why I started this work, as someone who lives with asthma here on the beautiful and unsurrendered lands of the Coast Salish peoples, and specifically for me here on the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations here. The air is an absolute haven compared to my birthplace in Korea, or even in areas like Ontario and Alberta where I was raised. But during the past few wildfire seasons, I spent the summers worrying about whether the air in my own home was safe to breathe. And at the same time, when I looked at what resources were being offered, there were hardly any. And so that personal experience really pushed me to ask some bigger questions as I continue to pursue academia, which was, well, how do we adapt to this? Like, what does it mean to even adapt when the air itself becomes hazardous? But more importantly, who actually gets to adapt, and then who gets left behind? And so those questions led me into my master's capstone research, which I will be shamelessly sharing with you today, and how that bridges into the Fire Resilience Handbook. Next slide. So we've had back to back record-breaking wildfire seasons in the past decade here in BC, and this year is no exception. Now from Vancouver Island to Halifax and everything in between, my heart bleeds for Manitoba, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, of course. And we know that longer summers, hotter temperatures, dry climates all contribute to fire seasons that are starting a lot earlier and lasting longer. But when we talk about the focus about wildfires, it's usually on response and recovery. And while that's valid, I wanted to talk about adaptation today, specifically around smoke, which carries its own unique threats and concerns. I think there was just, oh, fancy figure. Can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Wildfire smoke contains particulate matter that's finer than 2.5 microns, or otherwise known as PM 2.5. Most of you may already know this, but just to give you a sense of scale, you can take a single strand of your hair, which is around roughly 70 microns wide, and you can line around 30 of these particles across it. So because of their size, they penetrate deep into the lungs and in some cases can even enter the bloodstream, which can cause an array of ailments, both short and long term. And so unsurprisingly, there is no safe level exposure to wildfire smoke, regardless of how healthy you feel, how athletic you might be, just keeping that aware. Next slide. And so when I began this research, the health risks of wildfire smoke, they were already known, already well researched, yet the public health guidance available to most people were quite limiting. And so that gap became the crux for my capstone, and I wanted to look at how adaptation is understood by the lens of decision makers and whether socioeconomic factors like income, for instance, were being accounted into the current policy landscape. I can go more into the details of the methods, but to simplify, I interviewed 15 experts ranging from policymakers of all different government levels, public health representatives, community leaders, all to hear how they perceive the barriers that low-income residents might face and what kind of solutions they see as possible. Next slide. And so based on my interviews, 4 themes emerged. First were accessibility gaps, intangible resources like air purifiers, filters, clean air spaces. It's not really accessible to all, especially in rural and remote areas. And second was awareness gaps. Surprisingly, many people don't actually see themselves at risk. They might even view smoke as a secondhand annoyance and something in the background, whereas others who were very health conscious felt overwhelmed by too much information or conflicting information. There were also some awareness gaps among hard to reach populations like non-English speakers, for instance, or any socially isolated individuals. Third were infrastructure gaps. So older builds often have leakier air, poor insulation, outdated HVAC systems, and even the cost of purifiers make adaptation particularly difficult for lower income individuals. And finally, program gaps. So there's very few targeted funding for air quality programs. And for the ones that are available, it's often met with strict eligibility criteria for both communities and individuals. Next slide. So the point is, currently, adaptation is framed as an individual responsibility. The public health guidance suggests you stay indoors and you buy a filter. And let's be honest, how many of us remember to check and replace our filters? So my argument is that we've taken a backwards approach to public health. Instead of putting the onus onto the individuals, we have to be able to flip the script. So what I mean is we have to embed adaptation into that infrastructure, into housing, into community systems, and let that benefit flow downstream. That could look like prioritizing higher quality ventilation in new builds, if possible, retrofitting public spaces, which I know the BC government has been on in the last couple of years. But to really flip that script successfully, the most important piece is local outreach as well. So partnering with trusted organizations can ensure each community's unique needs are being met. So whether that's multilingual, culturally relevant messaging, or installing community air quality monitors in rural and remote areas. Next slide. And we've seen some successful efforts slowly but surely. FNHA, for instance, have been on the forefronts of offering air quality support. BC Hydro has provided seasonal rebates for select air purifiers. We've also seen collaborative efforts with SFU Breathe in collaboration with Métis Nations and other local governments across BC. So the Fire Resilience Handbook is our way of supporting communities move from that individual burden to that collective resilience, as Kat had mentioned, while simultaneously increasing that awareness. And so for infrastructure, Oliver and Jana, which Jana will briefly discuss, are leading some of the building materials guide that is going to be discussed right after this. And same with funding, Jana is also preparing a clear overview of some available programs that's specifically targeted. And on outreach, Valentine and I have been working on the Fire Resilience Handbook, and I've been inputting my air quality primer while also pushing these issues into public policy conversations. Next slide. So to close, I'll leave you with this thought. We know wildfire smoke doesn't discriminate, but it's often the systems that we operate in do. And if clean air isn't accessible to everyone, then it's no longer an equal public health threat. It's just a byproduct of privilege. And so our goal is straightforward: to reduce the weight off individuals who often bear the brunt and build resilience into the systems and supports around them. And because resilience only works when it's built in and not when people are left to figure it out on their own. And so for your communities, I'd ask, where can clean air resilience be embedded into the projects that you're already working on? And how can we make sure it becomes part of the agenda and instead of becoming an afterthought? So I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation if you'd like. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jana.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Jana, and I will be presenting to you a bit more about our third tool, which is building materials and specifically in housing resilience within a changing climate. So I do want to start off by saying that there has been an increasing frequency and severity of wildfires in British Columbia, as mentioned. And this is coupled with a housing crisis, especially in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. Therefore, we have created this initiative to build a collection of alternative and climate resilient building designs and materials. And we have also created a view book to share this accessible information for non-technical audiences about these building materials, but also about retrofits and costing. And these tools are all for rural, remote, and Indigenous communities who have that greater exposure to not only cost variances, but their variable needs within housing and climate preparedness. Our work, I do want to mention, links these resources that we have found through our research to these building materials that did not previously have that connection. And then we develop these resources as experts and hope once, as Kat mentioned, our website is released, our work can become a resource for alternative building materials for these communities in non-standard climate preparedness, especially within wildfires. So these are the climate resilient building tools that some of my colleagues and I have been working on. I do want to mention that hempcrete is also a tool we have looked into, but it's not as fully developed as these tools right now. So I did just want to note that. I also wanted to note that the colors represent how fire resilient the building material tool or process is, with the darker colors being the most fire resilient, rammed earth and autoclaved aerated concrete, and the lightest color being the least fire resilient, being straw bale. But I do want to note that these ratings are very close, and do not let the colors fool you into thinking there's a drastic difference between straw bale and rammed earth. It's just so you can see the different levels. I do want to give a brief description of each material. For example, here, pit houses at the top. Pit houses are a traditional dwelling that are partially built into the ground, and they were traditionally used by Indigenous peoples in the Plateau region of Canada. Little materials are needed to build pit homes, and they do have a low environmental impact. They're also quite durable and insulated, but I do want to mention they're quite fire resistant. And this is because soil is a natural fire barrier as is, and half the house is under the ground. So it works out perfectly, and you can fireproof the home further with steel roofing. Moving on to rammed earth. Rammed earth uses compacted natural materials like soil, sand, and gravel to create these dense walls. And this is an example of a home in Ontario. Rammed earth has great thermal mass. Local materials are often used to build it. And it's very, very highly fire resistant, with a performance similar to reinforced concrete and a 4+ hour fire rating as well. Moving on to cob homes at the bottom here, this funky little home is built and handcrafted with a natural mix of clay, sand, straw, and water without formwork or brick needed. And it also has a very high thermal mass as well. And there's often hybrid homes actually now where a home won't be fully cob, but a mix between a modern home and a cob house. It is nearly 100% natural and biodegradable. And when plastered, it is non-combustible and highly fire resistant with walls that do not burn, and it's great for wildfire embers as well. Autoclaved aerated concrete is a lightweight precast concrete material made from cement, lime, sand, and water cut into these blocks. It's very breathable, and it has less density than aggregate concrete. It's also highly fire resistant, just like rammed earth, and can withstand flames for about 4 to 6 hours without releasing any types of toxic fumes. And lastly, straw bale at the bottom here is made using these tightly packed bales of straw for building blocks or insulation. And without coating, straw is going to burn, of course. But surprisingly, with coating, either plaster or adobe, it has a high fire resistance, tested to over 2 hours of burn time. But this, like I said, has to be plastered and coated. Otherwise, it is flammable. So I did make a table just to compare the different materials, and I won't go into features and function, design, and materials as I feel like I've touched on that in the previous slide. But I do want to look at the last 2 columns here, fire resilience and cost, specifically cost. And I do want to mention cost is going to vary based on whether a region is remote or an island region, whether there's ferry or air transport costs. But overall, I would say pit houses are the most affordable. They have a moderate fire resilience rating, but again, they're on the more affordable range. And rammed earth, as well as straw bale and cob, are all a bit more pricier. Same with AAC. But I want to note that rammed earth is probably the most expensive in the sense that you get the most fire resistance out of your material, but you pay a higher cost. And cob is a bit more expensive because it includes the plastering as well. Straw bale and AAC are more in the middle, but again, all of these are highly fire resistant, so it is based more on your region and also what your budget would be. In conclusion, I just wanted to reinstate that our goal as a team is to work together to enable and empower these communities with co-developing innovative solutions that lead to these better housing systems, technical systems, better energy security throughout British Columbia. And we've done this today, or tried to showcase to you today a little bit about how we do this through our Community Fire Resilience Handbook Kat mentioned, air quality research that Sharon mentioned, and building materials research that I just presented on. And through this collaborative approach, we hope to make this information and research accessible to all. We do want these communities to have affordable solutions that complement the capacity building and community resilience that they already currently have. And we believe they hold the knowledge and strengths for that resilience. So by co-developing these tools, we can work with them to prepare for and address challenges so that the future is more resilient for everyone. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We very much appreciate all of your time. These are our emails if you have any questions for us. And yeah, also right now we have the question period. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Kat and Sharon. I think this is very important research and a very useful topic for us and the collaborative here. We will take questions from in the chat from the audience.
I wanted to highlight potentially the elephant in the room, like those beautiful pictures of the alternative building materials that you showed. And this question that I'm going to ask probably extends to the smoke resilience as well. Where are the building codes at? You know, we know that these aren't the common types of dwellings that we see. And, you know, how would they get enabled? And how can we support to have fire resilience be in the building code as well, and clean air resilience be enabled in the building code. I guess yeah, maybe I'll just pause there and see if you have any comments on the building code side, and maybe a specific question to Sharon is if the building code at all is addressing clean air. To my knowledge, not much other than potentially filters.
I can start off with the building materials portion of that. Yeah, that's a great question, and that's actually something that my colleague, he's not here today, but Oliver and I like look into a lot. Is there are so many gaps, I would say, in like policy, specifically within pit houses, because that is something that is so like localized to different regions and communities. I would say with rammed earth, there are more modern adaptations, so they have a lot more flexibility within policy. I do know with autoclaved aerated concrete as well, it's not domestically produced here. They have been looking into it. Alberta potentially may open a company that can produce it for Canada. So that is definitely a struggle as well. Cob housing, I know Valentine, my other colleague has a lot of information on, because on the islands, it's actually quite common on the coast here. But there's no province-wide standard. And that is definitely something that Oliver and I are trying to get more research on, or at least identify where we can, yeah, figure out where those gaps are. And Sharon, you can speak there.
Yeah, thanks, Jana. And that's a really good question. Something that I think belongs more in the policy sphere. Just given you're absolutely spot on that there's no single building code for wildfire smoke in Canada. It's instead just more of a combination of all levels of government and local regulations that there's some guidelines depending on the municipality or the regional district or the province and territory, but it's not completely set in stone. There's no specific building code that exists specifically for wildfire smoke. But Health Canada recommends mechanical HVAC systems like MER13 and carbon filters. And I have anecdotally spoken to some engineers who do work on public buildings, specifically for their air ventilation systems. And a lot of public builds are incorporating the air filters. But then it becomes a question around how often and like the frequency of its replacement as well. So I think there is a lot of work to be done, and there's a good chance that it is currently being worked through, like Alex had mentioned before, lots of gaps there. But the simple answer is no, there's
not really, and not in
no.
not in homes at least. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi. I'm very personally interested in the topics that were just discussed here, and also for your context, I work for the Fraser Basin Council, so I don't represent a specific community here. Starting, I guess, with Jana, I did a bunch of personal research into building cob houses and rammed earth and adobe, and a lot of the resources out there came from, you know, different climates around the world where it was like much hotter and drier conditions. So I was kind of curious what you found, what kind of adaptations you found that folks were employing in BC. And like you said, there are a few of these kind of rebels who have gone ahead and building the structures despite the lack of codes, especially around like Salt Spring Island in there. So yeah, curious about what kind of adaptations you've seen with the climate here. And then Sharon, I did a project looking at extreme heat and different ways of collecting different data to go into some mapping initiatives. And looking at air quality, there was the purple air kind of stood out as the only resource we could really find for measuring air quality indoors. And so I'm wondering if there are any other tools out there, any other alternatives to that, and whether you're finding that you get a bit more kind of support and tread when you're looking in wildfire and air quality versus extreme heat and air quality.
I can jump in again, or unless Sharon, I wanted to offer if you wanted to start off with air. I'll just briefly say with the beginning portion of that, yeah, there's definitely a lot of material out there, I think, specifically for homes that are like in Australia, I found, or like parts of America that have a very different climate than British Columbia. So I did look into that specifically with pit houses and rammed earth. Cobb, I have some information on, but my Valentine colleague is much more versed on Cobb. But I do want to say, because of that issue with moisture and rain here, and ventilation being such an issue, adaptations will have to be made. And some ways that they found people could do that was through like gravel drainage systems or French drains that would go like underneath the cob home, like it would be kind of raised, still built into the ground, but enough that that drain, like those pipes can be implemented. So they have some way to release that. And I think like a barrier was a very popular option to prevent the rain from going like into the home. It'd be like a roof barrier so that it would slide off, and the roof, of course, would be resilient to water. And rammed earth also had similar modifications, but with also focusing on like the capillary pipes and drains and systems throughout the walls. That was more the issue. So creating that barrier between like the actual material and the outside coating as well, so it won't leak in. Cobb, I will look into a lot more. But yeah, that's a great question.
Could I just jump in and highlight something as well that we're putting on our website that Jana has actually been really helpful in creating alongside some of our other colleagues, which is we're building like basically a climate region map that's gonna help people navigate these various types of climates that they're living in. So we'll have a coastal region. Obviously, those materials would be a lot more like rain or like water resilient, whereas there's places in the interior that might need a little bit of different materials in terms of fire because it's hotter and drier, like for example, Kamloops area. And each of these sort of regions is going to come up with a flow chart to help people kind of figure out what is the best for their region. So I just wanted to quickly highlight that. Sharon?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And thank you, Rebecca, for the question. I find it very fascinating to work so closely with extreme heat, and I had to make sure that my thesis didn't bleed into that because they are very closely intertwined, but a whole issue of itself. I can throw some resources in the chat, but primarily when it comes to data, you're right that purple air monitors exist. But the only issue with that is that the data is held in the US and they're privately owned, but it is available for the public to see. And you can, oh, thanks, Dave. You can see a conglomerate of purple air monitors all across Canada if you look at the map. But you'll often notice, even with that, there's still some gaps with rural and remote areas. And that's kind of the same narrative with some of the other databases that Canada uses, like specifically ECCC uses their own air quality monitors. And so they'll use that to update their local maps. And so they have some resources available Canada-wide. And there's also provincial databases as well called Fire Smoke. And so they'll collect data from all, I think it's a shared database actually from Canada and the province of BC, all to kind of raise that awareness. But of course, for the average folk, no one's going to look at all of these resources. So what we often find is that most folks just rely on like your weather app on your phone. And that is connected to the database, I believe, with Canada, but don't quote me on that. So I can just send you some resources here, and I think you'll find when the website is up, there'll be a lot more, and so feel free to dive right into them. And of course, on one of that link I provided, this is just one of the the summary of it, Quebec has their own forecast. But yeah, I hope that helps.
That does. Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jenna and Kat. Yeah, very interesting conversation. And we're really looking forward to the website and the handbook whenever that comes out. So let us know if there's any like launch webinar or anything we can attend. We would love to be there and also pass it on to our collaborative members. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will see you at the next meeting.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you for a great session.